Well, hi there, everybody, and welcome to the Everyday Missionary Podcast, a podcast that is designed to help us figure out how we bring Jesus into the landscape of real life. And I want to let you know that that is a challenge to try to figure out because currently right now as a church, not here in the podcast, but as a church on Sundays, I'm teaching through the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a book that highlights the complexity and the complication of real life. And I think this is such a good, valuable lesson to keep in mind because I think as followers of Jesus, there's one part of us that should think very idealistically about life, right? We should be thinking about life in the context of what it is Jesus calls us to do and how to execute that as excellently as we can. And that's very idealistic, especially because that ideal is incredibly selfless, right? Like this is the big theme I see in the ministry and the calling of Jesus is a life given away for the sake of others who didn't appreciate him giving his life away. And then what he calls us to is to give our lives away to others, even for those who don't care that we're giving our lives away for them. And so, that's kind of the ideal vision. And then with that, there are certain values and ethics and dispositions and all of that comes with those ideal ideas. Ideal ideas, I guess that's the thing. But then we also live in a very messy world, and all great plans don't survive first contact with the enemy, right? And so they can fall apart quickly, and then we're trying to scavenge about to try to pull it back together and do our best in a very complicated and incomplete world. And so this current season of the podcast is trying to help us to, again, take our most important values and the things that are most ideal and inject them into a world that is going to be super messy all the time. Nothing's ever going to be really complete. We're never going to be able to tie everything up into perfect meaning under the sun, as the teacher of Ecclesiastes likes to say, but that's still the challenge it sets before us. And so as I've been doing here lately in the podcast, I've been trying to deal with the current subject matter of our culture and then bring to the table, like, what's the Jesus-centric vision for facing these times, and what are we supposed to be trying to accomplish or trying to do or trying to look like in the midst of that? And that is a very messy prospect because we don't even all agree as Christians on the best way to do that, or we don't agree always as Christians on how we execute the highest values and what we maintain versus what we let go in the process of that. And so today's subject is going to be probably one of the tougher ones that I tackle. And it's tough for a lot of reasons. And I think particularly it's tough because you can't fully execute it. No matter how hard you try, it's going to be very hard to keep all the pieces together and trying to err on all sides with grace, because that's a big thing to me. We need to err on the side of grace in all that we do. And now we're going to get into the weeds of something that's very impassioned. It has become very politicized. And I think in that, what I don't want to say is that depoliticizing it is the key. Like, I actually don't believe that. What I'm starting to realize more and more is I think there's always a temptation to either overly become political or to divorce ourselves completely from politics. And neither one of those things probably are actually executing the vision of Jesus for the world, because there is this kind of down-to-earth reality that if you say, well, I want to care about the poor, I want to care about the needy, I want to care about the disenfranchised, I want to care about education, I want to care about the environment, whatever it is, automatically you have to have some element of that political. And somehow your vote will also then be kind of directed by the fact that you hold these things as certain values. And so even last week's on Character Matters, that was something that we would vote often because we really felt that, if there wasn't the right character, you couldn't execute properly your responsibilities as a leader. And so that's really why I highlighted that. It was a statement we really would make a very big deal about for a very long time. And then we ran into kind of challenges with that. And then it becomes a little bit more problematic and we downplay certain things for the sake of other things. And then that's why I'm just saying it's all messy, right? Everything about it is messy when it comes to how we live Christian, do principled things, and then we have a political process that allows for a certain controlled level of democracy, right? So, in light of that, then I wanted to talk about this topic today. And like I said, this is going to be hard, less for the content. And I think more because, again, if we're trying to bring all of these pieces together about what are the broad range ethics of the kingdom as it washes up on the shore of this subject, it kind of shows that if you can't, A, divorce yourself completely from the idea of politics in it, and yet B, it also shows that both sides of our political spectrum hold different values in this that are similar to the values that Jesus would hold. So one side's going to have some things, and I believe Jesus would hold to those, and the other side's going to have some things, and I believe Jesus would hold to those. And this is where it becomes messy for us then as followers of Jesus, where we're trying to be as consistent as we can. And so we have to just think kind of more broadly in some ways, and we have to think about maybe creative ways for solutions that may not rely on the political process of it, but will have political connection to it, right? So that sounds like a lot of lead up. So what I've been thinking about, and I've actually been thinking about this one for years and years and years. This is not like a new topic, but I don't speak on the topic very often. But I want to talk today about what I think is the difference between being anti-abortion and pro-life. And I think these are two different kinds of things. And I believe for us as followers of Jesus, if we are to be consistently pro-life, then we have to think much more broadly than simply being anti-abortion. Now, what I don't plan to do in this podcast today is to get into the nooks and crannies of when does life begin and you know, how do we measure that? And is it arbitrary or not arbitrary? Is it at conception? Is it a heartbeat? Is it brain activity? I'm not going to get into all of that stuff. That's really not my thing. I'm going to treat this as kind of like, let's call this a settled thing that we say, you know what? Just we believe life is there, whether it's conception. We'll just go with conception. Let's just keep it simple for now, right? So typically most evangelicals kind of land in that place. And I want to also just state for the record, if you're watching this podcast and you're not an evangelical, I'm talking in-house. This podcast is always kind of designed for in-house dialogue in the evangelical world. I'm not talking about Catholic necessarily. I'm not talking about Republican. I'm not talking about Democrat, agnostic, general society. I'm talking about how we as evangelicals are trying to be more like Jesus in the world. So I want to get that out of the way a little bit because I think sometimes I'll get feedback from people. In fact, I've probably in the last 2 months had feedback like 5 or 6 times like, well, that didn't win me over as a liberal. And I'm like, I'm not talking to you as a liberal. Or somebody that was mad about something I said, about character. And I'm like, and why didn't I bring up, Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump? I'm like, well, because Biden doesn't claim to be an evangelical, but Trump does. And most evangelicals won't vote for Biden, but they'll vote for Trump. And like, let's just kind of do in-house assessment, So that's kind of the heart behind this whole thing. And so with that, I'm going to go with kind of our evangelical understanding of anti-abortion versus pro-life and how we need to shore this up a little bit more. Because if we are to be authentically pro-life, it is not as simple as just being anti-abortion. And I think that's sometimes how it gets distilled down. In fact, even in a recent podcast, I had some kind of feedback from people because they're like, hey, but, again, when it comes down to the end of who I vote for, I'm going to vote basically because abortion is wrong, and I'm going to vote for the candidate that's always against abortion. And I completely understand that. Matter of fact, I don't have a debate with that. That's not even what I'm really getting at with any of this. But what I do think about is, okay, if that's going to be then the direction we go, and we say because we are pro-life, that pro-life has a lot of arms that come out that have to be considered in the process. Because to be authentically pro-life, and I'm saying this in the way that I think Jesus is pro-life, because when I look at Jesus and his ministry, I think he was very much a person that was trying to lift up the poor, lift up the broken, lift up the hurting, rescue those with problems, give dignity to those where society had devalued them. And all of those were things that emphasized his priority for life. And if I think about even the promise to Abraham, it's that God would bless the nations. He wants to bring blessing to the nations. He wants to bring flourishing to the nations. And so on this topic, we have to think about a broad range flourishing. Now, to maybe start this off just a little bit, I'll give you my own, this is just my personal position on this whole subject, and then I'll build out into the complications, right? So for me, I am what I like to I've wrestled with this a lot. And so I would come to a place where I'm fundamentally pro-life when it comes to the womb, because I think about that we need to care for the weakest, the smallest, the poorest, the least protectable among us, right? And so certainly would land in that space, and then that continues to go up. And so as much as the child is poor, weak, and broken, perhaps the mother is also poor in a tough spot and maybe emotionally, internally broken inside over things. And we have to care about both equally. And I'm going to get into that more in a minute. On the other end, I do not support the death penalty. I've not supported the death penalty in a very long time. I'm almost Catholic in that sense. So for a second here, we're becoming from evangelical to Catholic. But for me, I just consistent. I just go, I don't think humans should actually take the life of other humans through a legal process. I just don't think that should be there. I believe that I need to be pro-life on both ends. And that's where, again, I go back to this weird thing that generally when then you get into the political fray, one side is pro-life on the early end, but they're more pro-death penalty on the back end. And then you almost flip it when you go to the left side, and they're very pro-choice and then very anti-capital punishment. And so I'm this weird split, right? Again, I'm not that weird split for political reasons. I'm that weird split because I actually think that that's a value of the New Testament. Government can do what it does, but I see Jesus as the guy that steps in. And like when the woman is caught in adultery, the Bible, God's word is clear that her execution is demanded by God to satisfy justice. And Jesus says, don't do that. Unless you're without sin, then throw the rock. And so I see Jesus as stepping in and stopping a lawful execution, lawful according to God in the Old Testament, because he is so pro-life, actually. And certainly we see many characters in the Old Testament that were deserving of execution for their penalties, and there was mercy there. And so, again, the deeper justice is keeping them alive, I think. So that's just me. I know some of you are already going to want to take issue with that. I get it. That's just me. So that's one part of this, is just for me personally, I'm consistently pro-life on all categories, and that keeps it really, really clean. So when somebody says, well, what about, this? I'm like, yeah, I don't think we should take anybody's life. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what they've done. I don't think we should take their life. Now, am I getting into warfare? Not getting into that. Different topic, different day, different subject, totally different thing. But when you're talking about state-sponsored, right? That's the thing, state-sponsored, then I go, I'm consistently pro-life. And I am because, again, I think our job is to emphasize this value that we hold. So with that, though, here's the other extension of this. And this is where this is going to start to get a little messier, I think, for some. Because I think we have in our mind like simple ideas on the subject, and I think being pro-life is costly. I think pro-life is a multi-year investment, and it's not as simple as being anti-abortion. And I think in that, there has to be a disposition of heart toward women in general, and then that trickles down all the way to women who end up in a position where they're deciding if they're going to keep or not keep this pregnancy going. So there's a lot that kind of goes on in there. And so here's one of the first things I kind of want to share from a statistical perspective. It's kind of estimated that between puberty and 45 years of age, roughly 1 in 4 women will have an abortion at some point in their life. So, that's a pretty high number, and it's a high number considering it's probably not an accurate number, and the number is realistically even higher than that. Now, here's where it gets a little sticky. The majority of those come from Protestant or Catholic or mainline evangelical backgrounds. And so that the majority have a religious background who pursue abortion. And let me now bring you into my own personal world for the last 30 years. I've dealt with many women who have had abortions in that time. And with the exception of one, they were women from evangelical Christian homes. And so when you get their story and you begin to find things out about them, you find that there was a great deal of shame culture around if they had sex. If you have sex, I'm going to kick you out of the house. If you get pregnant, you're on your own. We're not going to help you. There was a lot of shame attached to things. And then certainly it's more shame that was attached to a woman than it was if it was to a man. So if, for example, their brother got caught having sex, the penalty wasn't as bad as if she got caught having sex. And so while society talks about slut shaming and they go, well, there's been all this slut shaming, and we as evangelicals go kind of push back on that, the reality that was there is there probably was a level of, we're going to shame a woman more than we're going to shame a man. And so it puts this girl or woman then in a very precarious position that says, if I get pregnant, can I go to my Christian family and they're going to help me, care for me, love me, or are they going to shame me and shun me? And in every one of those cases, the threat was shame and shun. And this is one of those things that has to change. In fact, years and years ago, when I first became a lead pastor, there was a young woman in our church in high school. Her and her boyfriend ended up, having sex. She got pregnant. And then, they came to me with the parents and they're like, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we're a small church and you're going to be showing really soon and everybody's going to know your family. And so I want to have you come up on a Sunday with your boyfriend and I want to explain how you've decided to keep this child. It's a beautiful thing. And we're going to treat you and this child just the same as every other child born into this church. And one of the things we would do for every first child was a church-wide baby shower. So I said, this is what we're going to do. So brought him up, everything else, just really affirming of, hey, life is life. And if we're pro-life, we are pro-life. And we're going to do a shower and we want you all to celebrate it. I had never had more kickback in a church program in my life. And it was like, no, you're rewarding this. You're downplaying the severity of this. And there was just people that wouldn't come. They're just like, no, this is the first one ever in our church I'm not coming to. That is a problem. In fact, all of this is a problem. I had somebody write to me last week, talked about being, very anti-abortion. And if a woman is too lazy, too stupid, or too drunk to deal with not getting pregnant, she shouldn't have the right to kill her child. And I go, even that is part of the problem. Too lazy, too drunk, too stupid. These are the things that we have to remove from our thinking and our vocabulary. We have to remove kind of the shaming, the sense of you're a lesser person. You were dumb enough to get into this problem, so now it's your problem. Like all of these things are the things that I believe massively we need to retire as a way that we try to deal with these problems, because it does not help and it does not raise the dignity of that woman. And then with that, if you're not raising her dignity and if you are not thinking about the fact that this is a human being with a great deal of emotional, practical, and fiscal weight suddenly on her doorstep, whether you think she was smart or dumb or whatever, does not matter. If you're going to be truly pro-life, you realize that, this person is operating realistically above their pay grade right now. And as a follower of Jesus, our job is to come alongside, to bring help, to bring aid, to bring encouragement, to do whatever is necessary to emphasize that we are pro-flourishing. We're not just anti-abortion, right? And so these are those things that are going to have to change. We as evangelical Christians need to be as deeply committed and passionate about the mother as we are about the unborn child, right? We have to give them a reason to want to continue on with a very challenging thing. We don't want to minimize that, honestly, because I do think sometimes we have this, oh, you dug your own hole attitude. And it's sort of your problem. You want to play, now you got to pay. These statements are not grace. And frankly, these statements don't even mimic or mirror the stuff of Jesus. It just really doesn't, because again, when we look at how we stand in the sight of God, it is purely by the grace of Jesus and nothing else. If he pulls Jesus out of our field of vision for just a minute, we're all dirt clods, right? We're all just broken, inconsistent, mean, hypocritical, we're a mess. We are still a mess. We are only rescued by grace. And so by extension, when you run into a person that has a problem, we are to be extensions of grace in the same way. And this has not been great for us. We have, I think in a lot of ways, made it just sound less gracious and more judgmental. And we need to kind of pull away the judgment side of this thing and really emphasize grace. Because again, I can't help but think how many of these women, ones that I've talked to, that it wasn't like they felt they had a real choice. They're like, either I keep this baby and my family kicks me out, I keep this baby and I have a soiled reputation, I keep this baby and everything goes bad, or I pursue this abortion. And again, if you can look up the statistics yourself, the majority of abortions in the United States come from females that ascribe to pretty much the main Christian relationship of Catholic, Protestant, and evangelical. And so those are just realities for us to face. And I think sometimes that surprises people. They go, no, that's not going to be the case. Well, actually, when you dig more, you find that oftentimes what happens is we as Christians raise our kids saying abstinence, 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 which I'm not disagreeing with, but we're saying that, and then they end up in a relationship with somebody and they do something that maybe they regret, maybe they don't regret. I don't really know their heart in this, but they end up having sex. But because they've been taught abstinence so much, they don't think about contraception in the same way. It's a little bit more taboo. They don't pursue it. They have sex, they get pregnant. And then, of course, because they've been told abstinence and now they're pregnant, they secretly go and get an abortion so they don't have to deal with the shame of not being able to say they have led an abstinent life. Like, this is where the cycle is sort of internal to us. And so we don't want to treat it as though, oh, liberals get abortions and evangelical Christian girls do not. Actually, a lot of liberals don't get abortions because they don't have the taboo around like anything related to the pill or condoms or whatever else. It's like they kind of embraced sex ed, saying they're going to do this, so let's outfit them for it. My daughter just hit puberty, let's put her on the pill. Like, that's oftentimes more a liberal equation, so they can forego worrying about an abortion. But it can be religious families and religious girls growing up that there's all these taboos around things, and then they're still human and they have a biology and they end up having sex with somebody, and then they're facing this pregnancy issue. And again, knowing there's more taboo around that, this is why they're tempted to go do this. So then our vision has to be broader than just simply saying, let's get rid of Roe versus Wade and let's eliminate legal abortion on demand. It's actually got to start in the home, and it's got to start with the way we handle our girls, and it's got to start with the way we refer to women who end up in these circumstances. And it can't be that we use shame. Rather, we have to say, you know what, doesn't matter. That's life, and we want all of life to be flourishing. So it starts reputationally right there. Now, the second thing that I think we have to think about if we're going to be consistently pro-life is it goes beyond the borders of just simply saying, all right, we gotta just make sure that they don't take the life in the womb. Because here's another thing that's kind of something we have to face, which is in the states that have the strictest abortion laws, they also have the highest infant mortality rates, and they have the highest rates of death for the mother of the other states. And so part of the problem here is you go, we're not going to allow access to abortion, but we're also not providing access to prenatal care, to OBGYNs. Oftentimes these are in poor communities with poor women that just don't have the access that we in the suburbs have. Like the idea of, complaining about our insurance. There's many of these women would love to be able to complain about their insurance because they don't have it, And so the other thing we have to think about if we're consistently pro-life is not just simply saying we want to make sure that we don't have access to abortion. We also have to have access to all the medical needs that are there to create thriving for the mother and the child. Because the problem will be if they don't get good prenatal care, they don't get access to a good doctor and good food and nutrition, you're going to have a high infant mortality rate or a high rate of death for the mothers, right? So these are things that we have to care about. So this is where, again, if I just re-inject politics for just a second, we have to kind of think in terms of, okay, well, do I look at the world and say I believe in more care for the poor when it comes to government programs, or am I more anti-government programs for the poor? Now, I know we say, well, the job of the church is to do that. And I go, great, I think it is the job of the church to do this, but the church doesn't do a great job of this. We do an okay job of this. We do some things okay. We do soup kitchens okay. We do food banks okay. We do some programs okay. But we're talking about large scales, increasingly large scales of women who are going to end up in a circumstance where they're choosing between keep the baby or abortion. And part of what they have to factor in is, hey, I don't have a lot of money, and there are going to be some substantial needs as I go forward. And so we have to think in terms of how do we back that and get behind that so that they can get quality nutrition, they can get quality health care, they can get quality prenatal care, they can get access to what they need, so that it isn't just we're saying we're going to saddle you with the responsibility to have the child, but we're not going to help you in any other capacity. That's where we have to think more. Pro-life is costly, right? Pro-choice is a little bit cheaper, obviously, pro-life is costly, and we have to think in terms of how do we help aid in that cost, whether that be getting behind programs that do that more, giving to programs that do that more, encouraging programs that do that more. I mean, there's all sorts of things, because we're talking about lots and lots of people. If you look at your statistics and you look at how many abortions are per year, then you got to figure in, well, that's how many women we need to figure out how to help per year, right? Like, that's the way we have to do the math a little bit. And so that's just up to birth. But then as Christians, I think we have to think beyond that, because now here's your circumstance, not in every case, but in many cases. James chapter 1 says, true or pure religion is this, that we take care of orphans and widows in their time of need. What he's talking about there with orphans and widows is basically mother and child that has no man in the equation that can financially help shoulder a lot of the responsibility, right? So now that's what we have at that point. We've said, hey, we have been pro-life. We've given you prenatal care, we've given you food, we've given you access to good medicine. Now the child's here, and true, pure religion, if it's going to be pro-life, has to go beyond that point and go for the next several years. Because many of these children are born into poverty situations. And again, the statistics are clear. Kids that are born into poverty are going to have a higher likelihood of a poor education. They're going to have a higher likelihood of violence in their life. They're going to have a higher likelihood of a life of crime if that isn't somehow re-diverted, and that is cost again. That is coming alongside and figuring out how do we help make it financially feasible for these women to raise their kids outside of poverty? How do we make it financially feasible for them to make sure their kids have, again, good educations and good access to healthy food and nutrition, things of that nature? How do we minimize the impact of poverty on this life that we've said we are pro and for? All of this has to come into play for us as evangelical Christians if we're bringing the vision of Jesus to the table. And so all of that becomes important. And what's amazing about this is how much it used to be highly in the African-American community. And so now we have to think about how we bring aid and help and healing to the African-American communities that for so long have been kind of just pushed to the side or kind of kept in poverty for a number of different reasons. But this is also increasingly in poor white communities too. And so the percentages of unwed mothers in the white community that are impoverished and in the black community, they're getting closer to nearing each other as far as how often. I think even just this last year was the first year that there were more children born out of wedlock than in wedlock in the United States. And many of those are being born into poverty. And I can guarantee you, having seen poverty firsthand, it is a reckless world. It is a world where there is the potential for a lot of problems that will imprint on that child. And from that, you're going to have further problems. You're going to have problems that are going to spread out into areas of crime and gangs and drug abuse and all of that stuff. And so we as pro-life thinkers don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, if we can just get the court and we can just reverse Roe versus Wade, that fixes everything. No, that creates like 50 other different problems. And we have to be prepared to say, if we're truly connected and committed to a vision of life, all of those things matter. And we want to put our energies into those things. And frankly, we should want our government to put its energies into those things too. And this is where, again, I'm dovetailing it back to, you can't just hit this thing and make it completely non-political. At some point, it becomes political too, because all politics is the aid of government to try to create a flourishing society as best as it can. And if you're going to have a growing number of people in poverty that are, not two-parent homes and all of that stuff, we got to figure out how to then mitigate all of the risk that is there. If the option to end that potential trajectory doesn't exist, we're going to create all these trajectories, all these impoverished trajectories of all these individuals. And so, this even comes down to, if you're thinking like, hey, how do we have, a minimization of crime? Crimes directed to poverty, crimes directed to, drug abuse, and drug abuse is really connected to poverty because, again, there's hopelessness in those contexts. And so I say all of this, not because I have all the solutions. I just say all of it so we kind of track down the road a little bit further and we don't get as simple-minded as just saying, you know what, the problem is Roe v. Wade. Because realistically, even if you look at that, let's say the court removes that tomorrow. Abortion still will be all over the United States. It just falls back to states' rights. It's just saying the federal government can't step in and forbid. But now you get into all the states, and some states will get rid of it and some states will keep it. And then those girls that get in the midst of that will just travel those states to go get it, because again, there's still going to be all those other pressures if those pressures don't get removed, right? So if it's the social pressure for Christian girls or religious girls, or the pressure that says it's more a girl problem than a boy problem, or the pressure of shame or guilt or slut shaming or whatever it is, like those are powerful forces in the life of a mind. And therefore, we got to address that. And then we got to address the further implications of healthcare, prenatal care, good access to doctors, good access to food, good access to education, changing the poverty streak, because these things are powerful in the Native American community, the African American community, and now increasingly in poor white communities where drug abuse and opioid crises have affected so many things. And so all of that is the burden then we as Jesus followers need to figure out how to shoulder and to care about, right? And to make investment in. And no one of us can do all of those things. I'm not even pretending to have it be so, right? Like we can't do all those things. But we do have to kind of think and care about all of those things. Because sometimes I think what we do is we think ethically, but we don't always think theologically. And so it's a bit like a cat going after a laser pointer, and we go, well, the ethic here is we believe abortion ends a life, and therefore, like, that's just zero in on getting rid of that. And I go, right, but if you get rid of that, you've got 10 other ethical dilemmas. You have 10 other areas where you need to figure out how to be pro-life now, right? So you figured out how to be pro-life on the one, you got to be pro-life on all the others. For the woman that is pregnant, for the woman that's already had an abortion. Can I just say, for the record, a lot of times the debates that go on publicly in some capacity, 1 in 4 women are feeling shamed in that moment if we are so aggressive that we don't show empathy and compassion and understanding and seeing their plight, and understanding in particular part of their plight is the fact that they live in a culture that says this is legal to do. Like, I get it that we're pro-life and we can't fathom why it's legal, but when you live in a world that says something's legal to do, honestly, it changes a little bit of your own sense of how you view the subject when you're in a tight space, because you're like, man, I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't know if it's right, but it is legal. And so we need to kind of even watch out on our own rhetoric when it comes to those who have had abortions. We need to love these people, understand these people. We need to be at peace with these people. We need to let these people know that, hey, we're not here to judge you on this one at all. We want to maintain a much more bigger, bolder vision for life. And perhaps for some of these women that went down that road, had they had this vision that I'm talking about, had they lived in a world where the evangelical church didn't shame women, didn't make them feel bad for ending up in situations that they ended up in, and also really encouraged and emphasized, hey, we need to get you all the medicine we can. We need to get you the doctors you need. We need to get you out of poverty in any way we can. We got to make sure we're rallying around you, not just for the first year, but for the next 18 years. Because raising a kid is tough. Being a mom is tough. How can we be there for you, right? All of that, had they heard all of that, maybe they would have made different decisions too. So this is what I'm getting at. To be truly pro-life is very different than being anti-abortion. And it requires a great many things, right? It does require us to sound different, to think different, to care different, to put real money behind these things, to encourage programs that will emphasize these things, to reestablish dignity and value for all parties, the one that is pregnant, the one that is unborn, the one that already went through an abortion, dignity and value. I'm not here to judge you. All of that has to be embedded into the system. And listen, there are great programs out there that are doing some of these things, like Save the Storks and some of the kind of early prenatal environment is there, so certain types of locations and organizations that give you ultrasounds and prenatal and all those kinds of things. But there's so much more that mom needs. I mean, there's a ton more that she needs. And the more we can get behind those things and encourage those things, the more it's going to be a true pro-life position. And I think that's more of a Jesus-centered way, right? Because Jesus is really clear that he was here to make an investment into the forgotten. And I think it's easy for us to be like, those women shouldn't have abortions, and then they're forgotten, And we don't want them forgotten. If you were a single mom, you know what it's like. If you were raised by a single mom, you know what it's like. It is a tremendous challenge. And if we are asking laws to change that requires women to play that role, they need every bit of encouragement and help and support and aid they can get. And that is a true life position. And so, yeah, this is a difficult conversation all the way around, and it's a difficult thing to want to reinforce. But again, I think that's the way of Jesus. I will always say that when you look at his life and ministry, you look at what he's going to put on the test at the end in Matthew 25, it was, again, not that we all, got a chance to live in the suburbs and have our little moral lives and everything else. It was, how did we extend ourselves to the hurting and the broken and the needy of the world that we live in? How did they know they were loved by us and by God? And that is the overreaching tone of everything we do, right? That we are known for loving our God, loving our neighbor, and extending grace to them, because grace is this idea that's most felt, right? I really believe that when we talk about grace, grace is a thing that's most felt for people, and we need to be the source of that grace so they can feel it. So with that requires us to be radically, sacrificially, consistently pro-life in every facet of what I've been talking about, every facet. And I think if we can do that, we can do something even better than trying to make abortion illegal, which honestly, I'm not even sure that's realistic. But we can make it one of those things where it's more like, but why would I choose that? I have a support system. I have opportunities. I have a net behind me. And I know right now some of you are like, yeah, but if we create all those things, then women are just going to have babies and it's more costly. And I go, right, pro-life is costly. Right. That's my point. Like if we think we can be pro-life but not get our hands dirty, if we think we can be pro-life but not empty our pockets, that's probably not realistic, right? This position is costly. It's a huge fiscal investment. It's a huge emotional investment. It's a huge time investment. Life is costly. Look how much it costs to raise one child per year. It's costly. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per kid to get them to 18. I think it's like $250,000 you spend on a kid from 0 to 18. So that's the cost of life. $250,000 per every kid, right? And so this is the thing we have to think through. And this is the thing we have to use all of our faculties, whether it be our vote, whether it be our voice, whether it be our focus, whether it be our money, whether it be our investments of time and energy and effort. These are all the things we have to round out together to figure out how to really then emphasize this thing we call a conviction. And if we do that, many more lives will be changed. Many more women will be touched. Many more children will be touched. And from that, we will do a really great job of being everyday missionaries.